What's happening, everybody? Here's another video with your favorite Mr. Cator. In this video, we'll take a look at how we can incorporate forms into our beautiful app using Angular Forms. Forms enables users to either log in or change profiles, details, or just capture any details from the user of your app. Angular provides two different approaches to handling user inputs through forms: reactive and as well as template driven. The main difference between these two approaches is how the form processes and manages the form data. With reactive forms doing a lot of their logic on the component TS file, and the template does a lot of their logic on the HTML files. Here is a table detailing the key differences between these two types of forms, right? In reactive forms, your inputs are more dynamic, which means that if you are writing an app that is data-driven and so complex and super scalable, then reactive forms should be your best bet. And on the template-driven forms, these are more useful for adding a very simple form to your app, such as the email listing, sign-up form, or just a simple login form or page. These are quite straightforward to add into your app, but they don't really scale as much as the reactive forms. In reactive forms, the form model is the source of truth. What this means, it means that form control will defer all the behavior and the control to the name form control that will be existing within your TS file. I'll show you just after this explanation. Whereas in the template-driven forms, the source of truth is in your template HTML file, which means the ngModel directive automatically manages the form control instance for you in the HTML file. Talk is cheap. Let's go straight into a practical example. For those that has been following this series, I'm not going to be adding this form stuff here at first, although I'll end up adding it into one of the pages that are there, and then you'll be seeing as well the updates of how far we are with it. I'll just be adding it straight into the app.component.html file, where I'll show you how we can grab a name from the input, grab a value from the radio buttons, and as well as the submit button. For those that has no idea what I'm talking about, you can just go to the Cator YouTube channel, definitely hit the subscribe button, and then under the playlist tab, you will see that there is the first playlist called Front End with Angular, where you can get all these videos that of this series grouped together for you. For you to be able to use template-driven forms, you need to import a module called Forms module. This will allow you to use those directives as ngModel and other forms directives that your template needs. And as well as just go ahead and then maybe add something like first name. This variable will both be able to set our initial value of the input and also be able to track down the latest value that our input has. And then you can go ahead here and I just prefer to show that first name here so that you can see the changes as they appear. Go ahead and add an input, just a simple input. You don't really need anything too expensive. I think that is correct. The best way I try to understand this is I think of, remember those at output and something like the at input. When you are dealing with passing the data between a parent and a child component. So I think of this ngModel as the combination of the two, the at output and at input, with the input element being the child of this app component HTML file. So how it's happening here is we have this variable called first name that will be like, okay, I can choose to initialize the value here either by an empty something, or we can type in 1, 2, 3, and then it will come in here and checking these square brackets, it will then be like, okay, cool, I'm going to grab an input from this side and then initialize this input element with that value from first name. And then should any value happens to change within this input element, tell ngModel to emit that latest value back to first name. So you can think of it as this is two-way binding, by the way. So it's binding the output and as well as the input of this element, and making sure that this first name variable we have added tracks down the latest value that we have in our form. To achieve the very same thing with reactive forms, you need to import a module called reactive forms, and then you come here and say, let's say we have the first name control. So what it will do here is you have to say new form control, and then you can just give it the initial value you want to pass. Also ensure that your form control is imported from the @Angular forms. And the only thing you need to do the other side is to ensure that you register your form control using this form control, and then you say first name control. And then to access the value, it should be a bit different by saying first name control dot value, and that should give us the latest value we have here. Well, you can see there's already something typed out. The reason being is because I gave it the initial value as I was creating this form control. Well, you can see the difference are quite small, and that this one or the template does a lot of its things in the template side, and then the reactive kind of does a lot of its things on the TS file. Since I'll be using reactive forms for the rest of the tutorials, I'm not going to touch more of it right now. Let's say, for example, we want this template form input to be required. Well, you can just add an attribute called required, and that is just it. I mean, if you want to say if it's not required, you can pass a value like that. But in my case, I just want to edit like that and say it is required. And for us to be able to see whether this input is valid or not, we then add a local reference of this element, right? So in my case, I will call it the local reference first name input, and then it will have this as listening to the ngModel state that is there, right? I'll go ahead and maybe add the paragraph tag, and then do something like first name input dot valid. This will tell it whether it's valid or not by a true or false value. In this case, it will be like it's true, it's valid, which means when I'm saying I require this value, there is some sort of a value at least. But if I remove that, it will then change it to be false or change it to be true accordingly. This becomes very useful if we want to add, let's say, validations, right? To say, hey, if this is invalid, then show this certain error. In my case, I will just say the name is required, and then the style being the red, which means the text needs to be red if the value first name is not there. So if I remove there, you can see that it tells me that the name is required because of this local reference of my ngModel within my HTML file. The concept of template-driven forms become even much more interesting when you want to control it via a form, right? So in this case, let's say this form, it's a login form, right? You need to also ensure that this local reference is assigned to the ngForm of such a form, right? You can see, ensure that you move everything within the form so that this form can have access to all these ngModels that you have down here. Once I move this input inside this form, you will see that Angular same time says an ngModel is used within a form tag, either the name attribute must be set, or the form control must be defined as a standalone in ng option module. Definitely, I'm going to go with the first option here. So what it means, it says that you need to add the attribute name and then provide it some sort of a name or identifier that this form is going to know or link itself with this input. And then if I save, that should solve my problem. You probably are not seeing the benefits of doing this as yet, right? But let's complicate this form a bit by adding another input. This input, I'm going to call it let's say your last name. I need to just remove these values in here and then go ahead, change all this to be last name input, last name is required as well. And I think that is it, right? So if you want to then add a button to submit all this, then you can do something like this. The type of a button being the submit, and then you do that. So far, this button doesn't do much, right? So I'm just going to give it a name, submit my form. If I click it, nothing happens. But I would want it to be that when I click this button, the information that is here gets saved or logged somewhere, right? How to do it is there is another event emitter here that is called ngSubmit. What this will do is it acts similar to your onClick, but then this one is optimized to be used with your template driven forms, right? So then I'll say on submit login form, and then I'll pass it this login form reference that we have here. And then all I have to do is copy the name and then go to my TS file, add a function with the type form. I think the type is ngForm. And then I can do something like that. In this way, it won't be screaming anymore. Sorry, I had a double thing there. So yeah, that should somehow submit the values. But let's see how that looks, right? I'm going to the console and then I will, let's say the value there, another value there, then I will submit. You can see here, it has submitted these values as first name and last name as object, which means you can use it like that. Simple. I mean, the very same thing, you can just do it here and then do a click event and then pass in this function and give it the reference to your form, and then it will be able to access everything there. I mean, you can choose to still use your variables like first name and last name and stuff like that. But in many cases, you probably just want an easier way to put together your different properties in one object that you can submit into maybe some sort of a service somewhere. Again, you can be able to use your form local reference to control what the button does, right? For example, if I want to disable my button when the login form is invalid, then I can do that. And then you'll see that this is invalid. So how will my login form know that the form itself is valid? It's if either one of these inputs are not valid. I mean, you can see it already tells us. So let's just say Matozi, and then the name is Andy. You can then see now the form has been updated. So if I remove this, then the button will be disabled. I mean, you can do many other great stuff within here using these local references of your ngForm or your ngModel. A similar approach could be used to add other form elements like your select, your radio button, your button group, and many other ones, right? You can see here, I also still have the required attribute. You can make it optional. I still have the ngModel, and then this is referencing this skill variable that we have there, and then obviously the name attribute that our form will need to know it with, right? And then when it comes to my options, I just kind of iterated through this for loop, and then I'm iterating from 1 to 5, and then have the options value as those 1 to 5 values that I'm going through. Note that the name is given to the select element, which means the parent element of your select, not the option. The option only has to have a value that is specific to it, in this case being 1 to 5. So when I do submit this, you will see that it will be having the values that I've submitted there with this new name skill with a value of 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. And that is it with template driven forms. Before I go to the reactive forms, I would want us to restore our initial app, right? For those that have been following the whole series, right, you know that we were building a Cator online store to be able to sell different things like shirts, books, mugs, and I also updated content to be videos so that it can be a bit more descriptive. And you know that if we click any of these cards, it will show the product list component, which, I mean, it's quite a simple one. It just shows a list of cards that are showing the picture and as well as the title. And if you happen to click on either one of the products, let's say the white shirt, it will show you this new screen that we had to edit. So this shows the product details of whatever shirt or whatever product we are selling. And if you happen to click around here, you'll see that it shows you different images in a bigger view. There's other details as well of the shirt, the name, obviously, the price, some description, and then there is this section. This is where we're gonna take a look at how we can use forms to make sure that we can capture the details that the user is gonna click here. And then obviously we do have this that shows additional details, and then obviously guarantee and return policies that we've put up for our products. Inside this product, I have this component called product form. This product form will house in all these elements that has to do with getting details from a user, right? If I go there and then I open my HTML, don't be surprised by seeing some of these HTML text you haven't seen. This is Angular material stuff. It just brings the stylings in much nicer than normal HTML, right? So what I'm doing here is there's this section that only print out if the category is shirts, right? Which is this top section, right? And then we have obviously the label, which is select size, and then the button toggle group, which is this section here, that is going to be having a list of these button toggles, which means these small sections. And then we have a met divider. Met divider just adds this one single line here. And then obviously we have the met grid list. The reason why I did the met grid list is so that I can be able to divide this one line into two parts, where it will show the button and the other one will show this met select. Met select, similar as the select in HTML. So yeah, it's things that you already know, just that they look much more nicer. The question remains, how do we then add our reactive forms? Go under your imports and then say reactive forms module, and then go and add a new variable. Let's say in this case, we want to track this size control, and then we say new form control. By default, it's going to just be empty. And the third step is I just need to go and register it here. So I just have to say form control equals to the size form control that I have there. So in this way, we can be able to read and write the values to the size control. The same thing can be done for the quantity control, which is this drop down select that we are seeing here. And then we just go ahead and then link it from here. So form control, then is equals to that, and we close it just like that. Perfect. And for us to be able to show the value of size control, we just then have to interpolate that and then just save value, just like that. You save that, that should be good. Whenever you click here, it will show the value. I see it's showing bold here. Oh yeah, I think this is because of that. I just need to make sure this becomes an I, which is the very same as that. If I save and then I click here, it can be showing me the latest value as required. But let's just say, for example, we want to have to check some, let's say an if statement to check if the form is valid or not. Don't really have to be. I'm gonna do this dot valid, and this should tell me a true or a false. It says it's currently valid. Okay, maybe it's because it's not marked as required. So let's go ahead and mark this size control as validators dot required. You see, we are still doing something similar to what we were doing on the template driven, but then it's just that we are doing more of it in this TS file. The moment I added that required, you can see that it has changed that to false. If I click at least a single value, then it will change that to true. And that is it with some of the validators. So then what happens if we want to group these form controls into a form group? So then we can do something like product group, which is going to be the name, and then we say new form group. Then I think let's do that, which is not entirely true. I just go ahead and then update all this other stuff. That should work. I think I just need a comma instead of a semicolon. I might want to also simplify the name to just size and then quantity, since they belong within a certain group. And then all I need to do here is then add something like a form. So I'll go at the top here and then add a form. Then it's going to have something called FormGroup. And then I think this name is product group, and that is that. We'll move everything else inside the form. And you can see now it doesn't really know what this size control is, right? Then we just need to change this to be the form control name. And then we change it to match the name we have here. And then there is that. I'm gonna just remove this p tag. Also update here as well. And then make it quantity. And then to be able to submit, I just need to add a button of type submit. And then on the form here, I go and then say ngSubmit. And then, yeah, I think we can just say add to cart. Like that. I'm gonna add this function in here so that it can be executed. And then I think the error should go away. Wonderful. So that's it. I mean, since then we do have our product group here, we can just go ahead and then use the values there as we want. So if I click here and I also click here, then I show what is being console logged. And I say add, you can see the proper object is coming across. If I update it, and then maybe I update the other one to 10, then the proper one also still comes. which is like the very same thing we were able to do in templates. It's just that here we do it more in TS4. Let's see how we can create the form control and the form group using the FormBuilder service. To start off, you need to just add a constructor. That constructor should inject the FormBuilder service, which is FormBuilder, will be imported from Angular Forms, and that is that. And then to be able to do the very same thing here, I'm just gonna build a service. I'm gonna call this the builder service. You can then just say, let's say it was the product group, right? Product group. Then you would say something like this dot FormBuilder dot group, and then it will add something like that. Let's just comment this one out. Commented. Add the protected access modifier there, and that is it. This literally has done exactly the very same thing as this. You can see here, this is like a shortened version when you don't have to be saying new control, new whatever. It will kind of do it for us on the fly. And the last one, the FormArray. So FormArray is an alternative to the FormGroup for managing any number of unnamed controls. From my understanding, it's if you would like to add some of the controls dynamically, so it's like on the fly as needed. So, you know, sometimes on some forms you would see that you have a section to add maybe your hobbies, a list of hobbies. So once you add the first hobby, you say, okay, I like playing soccer. Then you say add more, add more, add more. Upfront, we don't really know how many more you might want to add. So then the FormArray becomes a very useful tool or to use in that instance, because it's like you can do any number of new elements in your HTML file being controlled by your TS file. So yeah, you can see here, to do it, you probably just need to go and import your FormArray, and then you add it like that. So using the very same FormBuilder pattern, you just go ahead and say .array, and then you kind of, you know, at least give it an initial control to add there, right? So what you then need to do is, to get the values from that FormArray, it's something like this .form .get, and then this is the name of your FormArray, and then you should be able to get its values and kind of iterate from them. In here, then you can see that if you want to add a new form control within that form array, then you just have to say call that form control, then push a new form control with either like an empty value or even validators or any other configurations you might want to add into your control. And then on the template, all you need to do is, this is quite important, ensure that you give this attribute form array name, and then obviously the name of your form array. In this case, it's aliases. And then you can come in, have a section here where you'll be like, okay, I'm going to iterate through all the aliases controls that I have, which means any number, and then create new inputs as needed. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let's keep the fire burning. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share these videos with your friend, and tell that friend to tell the other friend. Otherwise, see you in the next episode. Inkomo na cancer.